leave some time for Q&A at the end, but if you at any point want to send me an email, please do. I have it on the last slide that I'll leave up while we're doing some Q&A today. But I am here for you. I'm also fortunate, honored to be your keynote speaker at IATLC this upcoming fall. So starting to gear up already and prepare for that. Be doing a lot actually on the 5 C's, ACTFL proficiency guidelines. I just recently got certified in oral proficiency, full oral proficiency interview guidelines, so I've been working a lot with that and trying to align a lot of my teaching practices to proficiency guidelines. So I'll be speaking on that since that's our overarching theme for IATLC. It's such a long acronym. Gets me. So, and then Amber's also recording because she's going to be teaching a course in Spain. So hi everybody in Spain. Not live, obviously, but hopefully this will be of benefit to them. So she asked me today to come and talk to you about communicative and task-based language teaching, which is really exciting because you're going to see a ton of technologies. They have lots of bells and whistles. They look really great, but they're absolutely useless as a methodology if they're not paired and aligned with a solid theoretical foundation and an understanding of what method aligns to this pedagogy. So having your learning objectives at the forefront is really, really important. And I know I love Amber because she always does such a good job of articulating that. I've been to many presentations, as you can imagine. And sorry, I'm out of breath because I don't have a lot of space between my diaphragms. So I promise I won't pass out on you, but I feel very, very out of shape here. So a lot of times we go to these technology presentations, somebody will present an application, and we think we have to use it, right? It looks really great and we want to use this new application. But if we don't take 10 steps back and actually establish really clearly what our objective and our outcomes are for the students, that technology will fail. And the students won't understand why they're using that technology. We'll feel frustrated because you'll put a lot of investment into understanding that technology, creating some really great project, and then things just seem to fall apart. And that's happened to me. I've been just as guilty of doing that myself. And so that's the goal today, is to, these are my objectives. So let's see here. It's kind of fancy schmancy doing this on my, okay, Amber, there we go. There we go, okay, all right. So I'm gonna first go over the historical background. So why communicative language teaching should be our standard. I am not here to impose a teaching method on you. The good thing about CLT is that it's absolutely open-ended. So there's actually a lot of teacher autonomy there. So you can see, and we'll talk about some of the tenets of CLT methodology. And just as I wanted to do this just before I get started, how many of you have taken a teaching methods for foreign language pedagogy course in the last 10 years? Just raise your hand for me. Hi. Okay, awesome. Good. So hopefully this will really help orient you. And any questions along the way, please, they're very welcome. So I'm going to talk to you about why CLT is the standard and should really be prominent in our lesson plans, and how we go about the foreign language classroom. In my 4 for 10 class, which is the class that I teach for our future secondary ed majors in German, French, and Spanish, and a lot of times we get different languages in there too, which is great. I talk about buzzwords a lot, and really they're concepts, and hopefully concepts that should drive how you organize your lesson plan, that of course are all in line with communicative language teaching. So I'm going to talk about some of those, highlight some of my favorites that have been really, really essential and helpful for me. And the reason for this isn't just to talk about theory and method, but it's, of course, to hopefully help set a precedent for how you vet these new technologies today as well as next Saturday, right? So that's the goal. And then I'll get into TBLT, which is task-based language teaching. I was fortunate at UC Davis as a graduate student. I got to take a 3-day seminar with the founders, if you will, the Willises. They're from England. And they actually came to UC Davis and gave a fantastic seminar on TBLT. So I respectfully and legally robbed their materials and I'm sharing them with you today. So that's what the bulk of the packet is for you. And then we'll get to the pinnacle question: what about technology? What does technology have? What's the role here? I firmly believe that when these three or these two things, when buzzwords or the concepts, the theoretical construct, the method is in place, I firmly believe technology can augment, improve, and provide enhanced opportunities for interaction in the target language, for student engagement, creativity, a lot of really great things, and we'll talk about that. But again, the foundation has to be in place. I'll talk about some examples, tried and true. I tried really hard to present a continuum, so some of the most basic applications and how I use them every day in my classroom, all the way to the more advanced. So wherever you find yourself today, hopefully you can feel comfortable with one of those. And then, like I said, I'll leave time for Q&A. It was really, really hard to frame this presentation because there's so much to talk about. And Foiling for 10 is kind of my bread and butter course at Boise State. It's why they hired me. We didn't have a linguist in the department. I'm the only one right now, a little lonely. And I came on board and got to start teaching that course, and I love it. So the teachers that, thank you, Cassie, are you Cassie Shelton? Yeah, okay, I finally get to see a face, because a lot of you I find, you know, I'm emailing, would you please let one of our students come and observe you, because I really appreciate that collaboration. So that's the course. A lot of the materials that I will be presenting today comes from that, as well as it stems from some new and updated information. So I'm just going to go through really quickly. This is a slide I use in my general linguistics class. But you can see, this is kind of the historical trajectory of how applied linguistics shows up. Second language acquisition, which is kind of our focus, right, via the applied aspect of FLA. It's a branch of applied linguistics. It really is real new. It doesn't show up as an actual discipline as common until around the 70s and 80s. So we're still kind of in muddy waters trying to figure out this whole thing about how second language is developed. How many of you have heard of Chomsky? Probably more for his political ideologies than linguistics, maybe. But really, up until the 20th century, there was not a discipline or a science of studying the language. Everything was prescriptive, based on prescriptivism. Prescriptivism is still alive and well. It's an ideology that trickles down. I see it all the time, especially with my heritage language learners, my native speakers. These prescriptive ideas about what is correct and what isn't correct, and those are fun topics that we explore in my Christian religious course. Don't have time to go into today, but really it is an important time to do that people start thinking beyond just coding, identity, psychology, response. They draw from that and provide a theoretical construct right around the 50s, actually, and it was really, it's still very prominent today. There's definitely principles of behaviorist theory that stem or that help inform our classroom. Chomsky is going to say that actually behaviorist stimulus or response language constructor built outside of what you're born with is absolutely not correct. And there's really fun wars that happen around the 60s, debates between Chomsky and Skinner and Bloomfield. But both of these guys, or all of these theorists, really weren't interested in second language acquisition. So any of the methods that stem from those are built actually on how first language is acquired. And that's really, really important, because we see some faulty things with those methods because they're not fully developed. It really isn't until the 70s and the 80s where we start saying, okay, well, let's look at second language acquisition aside from first language acquisition. There's a big difference between children and how they acquire language and adults and how they acquire language. Most of you came out in high school, which is really muddy, really difficult, because the way we define being an adult in terms of linguistics and language acquisition is actually not the 18, right, standard. It's actually puberty. So in high school, you have this crazy continuum. I mean, I still have some freshmen that I'm questioning whether or not they've gone through puberty, right? So, with all due respect. So, you kind of have you could easily have a classroom where some of your students are going to respond very similarly to the way a first language is constructed, and you're going to have another set of students that need the explicit, strategic processing. So I commend you. You are absolutely on, what's the term in English? I can't think of English today. You're on the front lines, right? So you're dealing with really, really complex individuals, and it's very difficult to generalize, okay, when we're talking about the way your students are constructing a second language. So, having said all that, what is the purpose of theory? I know that oftentimes I talk with teachers and they say, I hate that theory, I don't want to talk about theory, I just want to do. I understand that, I sit in both places, but I would say that theory is really, really important, because if you don't have a clear understanding of the theoretical foundation, most of what we bring to the classroom, or most of what we vet as a good classroom practice or a good objective or a good learning outcome is on perception. Perception is valid. I've taught, I mean, most of you, a lot of you have taught 20, 30 years, I'm sure. Quite experienced, have incredible perception about what works well in your classroom. I'm not discrediting that at all. I've been teaching higher ed, I think, for 13 years now, and I have some ideas of kind of what jives with me too, right? But those are just perceptions, and oftentimes if we just have a perception, it's a lot like quicksand. We perceive it as sand, we step in and all of a sudden we're sinking. We need to understand and have a clear basis for why we're doing certain things, and they need to align obviously with standards and the national standards, right? Because these are the people that are investing millions of dollars, lots of time to actually vet hypotheses and do hypothesis testing. So when it comes to second language acquisition, we have 4 key areas where any researcher will camp out. The first is to describe the second language. So this is really interesting stuff. People will actually compare, I'm going to use Spanish-English because I'm a Spanish linguist, I teach Spanish. They'll actually look at fundamental differences between the L1 and the L2. So when I say L1, that means first language, L2 is second language. They'll look at fundamental key contrastive issues between English and Spanish and try to anticipate and then see what students do with contrasting rule systems and then the errors that come as a result of those. Okay, so that's one area where SLA theorists or researchers will camp out. Another one is to explain and to look at the external, the social, and then the internal individualistic factors that of course contribute to how a second language is acquired. This is actually the hot topic right now in the discipline. People get really, really worked up about it. I think it's fascinating to just sit back and watch them get all heated. But the external would be Vygotsky. Have some of you heard about? Okay. So Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. A lot of our postmodern theories are kind of aligning to the belief that the way you construct language is absolutely outside of the individual. It has everything to do with how people are as social beings, okay? So looking at the environment. Then there are cognitivists that say actually internal factors are what really matter. And so that's a fun area where people are trying to establish hypotheses and then test those out. There are a lot of people that look at individual differences, individual learning differences like age, gender, if you're an extrovert or an introvert. There was just recently an article that was published that debunked whether or not, that said that individual learning differences actually don't matter in the long-term attainment of a language. I guess that can be good news and bad news because if that's actually true, the standards are going to have to absolutely be reevaluated. It's good news in the sense that I guess whether or not what you're doing in the classroom, if you keep to a solid theory and a method, your learners that have different styles, they'll eventually get there. Yeah?
So you're talking like Bloom's taxonomy stuff?
Yeah. I mean, Bloom's taxonomy, yeah. Okay. More or less, but there was a lot of discussion, especially like in the 80s, about extroverted, introverted personality types. We see that, I mean, this is again one of those perception things. I see certain students in my classroom that are so perfectionist type A, they don't want to practice, they don't want to put themselves out there. And those personalities struggle a lot at the beginning. Sometimes that type of, that quality will really behoove them in the long run, but it can be really frustrating to be their teacher through the beginning intermediate years, right? So that's what I'm talking about more or less, but I think that that's something that we're still working on, still trying to understand. The last area is our area, it's pedagogy, and that's actually the research that I do. So I'm really interested in, based on these three things and what other theorists are establishing, how does that actually inform the classroom then? How do we take that to the classroom and interpret it? Because for me, theory is, if theory just stays in theory land, well, that's not really important to me, right? I want to see its actual practical use in the classroom, and I want to see it benefiting teachers. I want to see it benefiting my classroom. When we think about historically, there's been kind of a divide, and this is really interesting too. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because at Boise State we're vetting for textbooks for our Spanish program. And if you have this understanding, you can quickly look at a textbook and go, oh, that's the approach. And then you can quickly understand why all the activities are one way. I usually go to like chapter 5. Forget the first 2 chapters, right? Because they're fluffy. But go to chapter 5 and you just read through and you go, okay, natural approach. Oh, okay, cognitive approach. And this is important, and it's again messy because natural approach is an implicit approach. So it's Craction. If you know Craction or have heard of Crashon's input hypothesis, it's absolutely based on the belief that if you just expose students to natural language use, voila, little by little, they're going to get it, okay? Extremely frustrating for an adult learner. Extremely frustrating. Yeah?
That kind of like when they do TPRS, those systems would...
TPRS is completely a natural approach. So, and most TPRS, how do I say this in a politically correct manner?
I don't care what you say.
Okay, well, TPRS, most contemporary theorists would have a lot of issues with the fundamental theory behind TPRS for adult learners, absolutely. So in Allie's case with kindergartners, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, that's a different story. Children absolutely connect with that type of engaging. And I should step back and say TPRS used exclusively is where it's problematic. TPR, TPRS.
And what does that stand for?
TPRS is total
physical response.
No, TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling is TPRS, and then total physical. They're 2 different things, but they're built on the same theoretical construct, actually. Thank you. So that's a natural approach. It's very, very effective with children. The cognitive approach is actually using explicit teachings, learning strategies, providing corrective feedback when it's appropriate. I've seen people go way too far with the cognitive approach, and their language classroom is grammar explanation in English. That is not what I'm advocating at all. What I'm advocating is when you arrive at a really difficult construct, the subjunctive is possible one. Or let's think about aspect, when you're trying to help learners understand a difference about the way the past works. No one thinks about this, okay, in their first language. They acquired it as a child naturally. As an adult trying to understand a different system, I firmly believe that adults really do need some explanation, some strategies to be able to deal with that. If any of you have ever used Rosetta Stone or seen how Rosetta Stone is taught, in graduate school I tutored a lot because grad students are really poor, and I had to use Rosetta Stone for a mom that had purchased it and wanted me to use it. And even the children were frustrated. It is so naturalistic and so debunked of any actual theory of second language. It's extremely problematic. A lot of districts in rural Idaho have purchased Rosetta Stone, and I get these very, very frustrated teachers calling me and leaving me messages saying, help me, how can I get certified as quickly as possible to go in and teach because this is not working. And it's just such a frustrating situation. So, okay, we'll leave it there. I have a lot to say on that subject, as you can see. So here we arrive, communicative language teaching, okay? So when is it actually coined? When is the term actually coined? It's in 1971 by Tel Himes, and it's in direct contrast to what was the established rule of teaching, or the goal of learning a second language. If you know about the grammar translation method, or if you've ever taken classical Latin, Hebrew, or Greek, okay? And Lenny, forgive me, but every single Italian class I've ever taken has always been very, very classical, very traditional, right? So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you'll bring something new to the state of Idaho, teaching Italian in a communicative way. But linguistic competence was the end-all, be-all goal. It was knowing about the language. There was nothing there about actually being able to use the language. So in graduate school, even still, the requirement is that we learn 2 other languages, and it's absolutely linguistic competence. Okay, so I know how to read Portuguese really well. Would I ever start a conversation with Fatima? Oh no, I'm absolutely embarrassed at how pathetic my speaking Portuguese is, because the classes that I took in graduate school were all built on linguistic competence, right? Same with Italian. Well, Italian's a little bit easier for me. Maybe that's because I am Italian. So communicative competence really is the gold standard. Tel Himes says actually the reason, the motivation for why we're learning a second language should be for knowing when and how to say what to whom. Okay? Functional language use. I know very few university students who are in my Spanish class because they want to know about the rules of Spanish. They want to go live in Argentina, they want to go see Machu Picchu, they want to eat really good tapas in Spain, and they want to get a fantastic job where they're actually helping Latinos in Idaho, whether that be in the health sector, the business sector, whatever you will, right? They want to use Spanish functionally. And that's really the value of communicative language teaching, and the value of this kind of renewed perspective of why we do what we do, okay? So, come on, move me along. There we go. All right, so, and this is the last slide on theory, and then we're going to get to some of the more practical stuff. There's been kind of a new, it's actually not new, but in SLA we've adapted connectionist theories, which I think can really, really help our understanding of what we should be doing in classroom. And I want you to think about your textbook that you're using right now. I want you to think about vocabulary. Tell me, how is vocabulary usually presented in a textbook? Chapter 5. A list. And how many words are our poor students supposed to? Well, 30 or 40 is like a really nice number for me. I've seen upwards of 50 to 75 words with ambiguous pictures presented. And what is the assumption in the textbook? If you were a new teacher, which I was, 13 years ago, looking at this textbook and you go, okay, this is kind of how I should frame my lesson plans. Where's vocabulary? The first 2 pages, 3 or 4 pages, maybe. And then you get this horrible list at the end of the chapter, right? Yeah. Okay, keep in mind that's a student's perspective of how they should be learning. It's based on their textbook. Okay, just memorize these words and then we're good, right? That is absolutely so contrary to how the brain functions. Our goal is to get those words from short-term memory to long-term memory. How do they do that? It's through this idea of connectionism, which actually aligns really well with computer programming. The idea is that you expose, and this is absolutely consonant with CLT, okay? So this isn't like another idea, it fits in with that construct. You expose a student to a new word, okay? And you expose them to it not in a list, but contextualized. So that means that they're seeing this word, not with some ambiguous picture, but actually used in the target language in a sentence, the way it's supposed to be used, right? Hearing it in beautiful language from you or from a native speaker. There are lots of different ways to do this. That word is activated in the brain, okay? How many times do you think any given word needs to be activated before a student actually moves it from short term to long term?
7 times.
7? Okay.
20?
Yeah, the jury's out, it's 10 to 16 times. 10 to 16 times. before they start making associations. And that's when you see, so a neuron is activated in the brain. What we want are many neurons being activated every time they hear that word. Associations being made so that when they hear that word, they don't have to think about it. It then becomes what? Automatic, right? What that means is that what we do in the classroom, we have to constantly provide practice, repetition, authentic exposure to words in context so that this idea of chunking takes place. There's an idea that grammar doesn't really exist, that actually vocabulary exists, and vocabulary is grammar. So how you present grammar should be through the linking, the association of lots of words. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example, like the subjunctive in Spanish. We often teach, espero que, right? Espero que, I hope that, I hope that, I hope that. And we hope that after they learn, I don't know, 20 clauses, they can make the jump and get that grammar at the end. That's a really good example of how grammar really isn't grammar, it's vocabulary. And so you can see here the importance of a lot of practice, exposure, activation, association, hopefully automatization. All right, now I want to ask you a rhetorical question. What is the ultimate goal for our second language learners? Is it for them to be native speakers?
They'll never be.
No.
They'll never be native speakers. And yet,
To be language users.
language users, I love it. I was having so much fun sitting back there. I was going, this is such a great group. They don't need me, they're doing great. Yeah, absolutely. They will never be native speakers, and yet so much of how we present things, how we assess, how we talk about our end goals are still muddied through that perception of you need to be a native speaker. This is correct, right? And you're saying, no, yeah, no, we shouldn't be doing that, right? And yet a lot of the ideologies come from that and can be really problematic. We had some great guest speakers that came from the Basque Country that are looking at a whole context of multilingualism there, and they're having a lot of problems with how to assess their students because their students grow up speaking 3 languages from the get-go. So they're multilingual native speakers, it's muddy. And their idea was, or this picture metaphor I liked a lot, they said rather than thinking about any given child as 3 different trees, 3 different languages, think of them as one tree with lots of branches. Some are gonna have areas where they're more developed than others, okay? And that can really help us as we perceive our second language learners. We want them to be this really awesome tree, right, with lots of different branches. They're gonna excel in some areas over others at any given time. We have to help them through that messy process. ACTFL did a really great thing. They helped in the 80s with their proficiency guideline from this infatuation, obsession with accuracy, and then this really cultural perception of fluency, because what is fluency? I've heard everybody under the sun try to describe fluency to me, and it really is just a cultural perception. And they moved us to proficiency, okay? So we now talk about language and language development in terms of proficiency. Accuracy and fluency are part of that, absolutely. In fact, in order to become an advanced and superior, if you want to be a superior speaker, you have to be absolutely accurate, right? No pattern of error. So I'm not saying that accuracy isn't important. It's just not the end-all be-all, okay? So proficiency is much more global and much more holistic. So what's really great about the American Council of the Teaching of Foreign Languages is that right about the time that the CLT became more prominent, they started re-examining this one-size-fits-all teaching method. So rather than being just a direct method, audiolingual method, TPRS or TPR, they present this idea of proficiency. And communicative language teaching is really holistic. You get to define what that looks like, okay? But again, what's the purpose? Communicative competence, that's your underlying goal. Functional language use. A lot of practice, a lot of exposure. So they look for proficiency goals, objectives in teaching, and like I just said, it really gives a lot of autonomy and empowerment to the educator to choose the techniques that best fit your classroom. So that's why I like the CLT. I don't think that it's imposing any one thing on you. It gives you the freedom and the choice, as long as your objective is functional, communicative competence. You can choose the techniques that align. One thing that I think is interesting, of course, because this is my area, computer-assisted language learning comes onto the scene at the exact same time. So, as these technologies are coming to the forefront, we are examining them through a proficiency perspective, a CLT perspective, okay? So, all right, so let's get to some buzzwords that help illustrate CLT, okay? This is my son. I think he's pretty cute. I have his picture on here because I think of interlanguage a lot like a toddler, okay? Because interlanguage is the in-between L2. So anytime that you're in the classroom and you see that students, no matter, let's say this is the 5th time you're going over vocabulary or grammar, and they're still making mistakes, and you want to pull your hair out, sometimes you want to throw something at them, study. I want you to think about this picture of my son. Think of a toddler, think of your toddler, think of your child that was a toddler, and just have a little bit of patience and know it's not your fault, okay? They are in the between. Markers or characteristics of interlanguage are hypothesis testing, okay? So they're gonna branch out, that's where you're gonna get yo sabo la respuesta, right? So I know the answer for those who don't speak Spanish. It's an overgeneralization of a paradigm from the present tense. So irregular verbs, you see a lot of this, that they'll make mistakes, but they're smart mistakes, okay? So they're hypothesis testing. Overgeneralization, I just said, and then simplification. So we see this a lot with ser and estar, the copular verb in Spanish, where you have 2 to be verbs, you only have 1 in English. You'll go through a very predicted order where you'll see students only use one of them. And then when they're introduced to the other one, they'll only use the other one. And then the third stage is that they'll use ser all the time, and they'll use estar for the ing verbs. If you're there, you're doing the right thing as a teacher. That's exactly the order that we would predict them going through, okay? So you just need to be aware of the next stage and get them to there. You don't need to get them to being a native speaker overnight. It's just not gonna happen. They're still toddlers, they're still working out becoming this human thing, right? Crashin, okay, remember, keep in mind, Crashin, he has a natural approach, and he builds his whole teaching method or his input hypothesis based on Chomsky's understanding of how language is acquired. That's problematic for some things. And I don't have the time to go into that. I wanted to highlight 3 of his hypotheses that I think actually are valid and really important and can help our classroom. Because they are built on some good principles. I just talked about natural order. Being aware of the fact that students, it doesn't matter how great a teacher you are, they're going to fall down. They're going to take predictable steps where you're going to feel frustrated, but just know that that's a good sign. You need to give them more language exposure, more practice, give them more opportunity to use the language in a functional manner to get them to that next step, right? Until they actually get to that goal of proficiency. Comprehensible input is something that we talk about a lot, and oh, it didn't show up on here. I guess I didn't see it. Darn it. If you grab your handout, I'll show you an example, a very basic example. In graduate school, my methods professor, I'm going to tell you what page here, just a second. Pages 13 through 17. So they're slides from a PowerPoint. In graduate school at UC Davis, my supervisor was all into PowerPoint comprehensible input. So this is an example of one. It's very basic. So it's problemas médicos. Sorry, it's in Spanish. Most of the other stuff is glossed with English, except for this one. But you can kind of get the idea here. The idea is that rather than saying, this is your vocabulary, ready, repeat after me. Una fiebre. Una fiebre, right? Doing this type of stuff. Okay, I'm rolling my eyes because how many times have we lived through that or just felt exhausted at the end of the day and done that with our students? One of the things that you can do with comprehensible input, and what you need to think about, and I didn't put it on here, but it's this concept of I+1. Have you heard of that? I+1? Okay, what's a scaffold? Scaffolding is a buzzword in SLA. Everybody talks about it. What's a scaffold do?
Raise things.
What?
Put to the forefront or raise.
Yeah, a scaffold helps somebody, right? So it's like a helping tool.
Like a ladder.
Like a ladder, exactly. When we're talking about scaffolding in terms in applied linguistics, we're talking about I+1. It's the idea of understanding where your students are at in their language acquisition and speaking to them just a level beyond that. Always providing a reason for them to rise to the occasion, but not something that's way beyond their grasp. Does that make sense? And that's not just in the way you speak. That's not just in your fluency or your rhythm or your pace. It's also in the types of activities you're providing for them. It's also the types of assessments you're giving them. Making sure that it's an appropriate scaffold for them to get to the next level. Comprehensible input means that it's input, and when I talk about input, that's everything that they're receiving, right? They're being exposed to. It means it's being comprehended. If it's I+10, it's not comprehended. So you need to think very clearly, okay, where are they at, where are they struggling, and how do I adjust this lesson, how do I adjust this presentation, how do I adjust this vocabulary in a way that they can comprehend it. One of the pinnacle aspects of comprehensible input is that you're doing comprehension checks to ensure. So that means every couple of slides you're saying, so what was the problem with the guy? What symptoms did he have? And hopefully you'll get a lot of people saying, una fiebre, right? And you'll go, okay, good. So they're comprehending it. So making sure every few minutes that they're tracking with you so that it's not I+10, okay? There's a lot of awesome technology out here that takes a PowerPoint presentation and turns it into something very interactive for every learner. Nearpod is that. I'll get to that at the end of the presentation, okay? All right, so affective filter. Anybody talk about the affective filter or heard it? I tell all of my students this needs to be on your teaching philosophy in terms that a principal will understand. Affective filter? Have you ever been in a language classroom where you feel really intimidated? Think back to when you were a learner. You felt like somebody might throw something at you if you had the answer wrong, or a teacher was hyper-corrective, always correcting. That's wrong, right? Or I'm glad some of you are like, no, I've been in language classrooms like that where you really don't want to talk. And the idea is that language classrooms really need to be familial. Our students need to enter in, feel like they're part of a community, and that the teacher sets a really important tone for welcoming that interlanguage, right? Hypothesis testing, overgeneralization, simplification. Those are good things. Even though they frustrate us, those are things that our students have to do. And in order for them to feel at liberty to make that, to make those mistakes, they need to have a low affective filter. So the idea is that comprehensible input is only comprehended in a classroom where the filter is low, where the stakes are low.
Friendly environment.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I know in high school you have a different dynamic. I can tell my college students, hey, ciao. If you're being disrespectful, you got a 0 for the day. See ya. I know you guys don't have the same liberties. You have parents to deal with. There's a whole different dynamic. So you have to be careful with that to respect classroom management issue. But what I'm talking about is knowing and choosing when the appropriate time is to correct and when it's not, and how to correct. I really believe in global correcting, so gathering information in my head, seeing that people are making the same mistakes, and when the activity is finished, choosing to spend 5 minutes to go over those mistakes in a way that doesn't single out anyone. I like to make fun of myself a lot, so that works really well if you feel at liberty. I talk a lot about my struggles as being a second language learner, and I think that really helps my students. Oh, wow, you went through this? Yeah, you know? Okay, negotiation of meaning. So this is probably one of the most helpful things when you're thinking about designing your activities. Tug of war, I like to think of it. You want linguistic breakdown. That sounds weird. You want your students to break down. Not emotionally, psychologically. You want them to have issues with communicating. Why? Our students often perceive that they know it all, or that they're way beyond a level that they actually are. When they're communicating and they're doing an activity where they have to exchange information, they have to ask questions, they have to respond, they actually have to use language in a way that's not a prescribed sentence. They have to use it in flexible, creative ways. They notice that they have linguistic breakdown. that awareness is really important. Oh, I actually kind of need to work on this. I need to practice this more. She knows a lot more about this than I do. That social awareness is really helpful. Clarification requests are going, I didn't understand. Could you repeat the question? And then fixating on that question. And that's real life. Do we not do this in real life? All the time. With my husband. Oh. All the time. I did not understand. He told me that. Could you please speak to me in a direct method, in a direct way? Because I speak very implicitly sometimes to him. I'm getting better at that. We always have these linguistic breakdowns. I have to clarify what my real intent is, and then we do recast. All of this is normal, functional, communicative practice that is really, really beneficial and helpful for our students. And then some of the activities that align with this are information gap. I don't have an example. I don't think I put an example in here. I was trying to look for one. We'll get to some of the activities here really quickly, but an information gap activity is like Battleship, for example, where somebody has half of the puzzle and the other has the other half. And they have to ask questions in order to get the information that the other doesn't have. It's a real good type of communicative activity that requires, most importantly, that your learners are asking questions. Who mostly asks the questions in any form of teachers? Do you know what the fundamental marker of an intermediate student is, according to ACTFL proficiency guidelines? Being able to ask questions. So that's one of the biggest flaws that we see, that our students cannot get to intermediate because they cannot ask questions. I can get somebody using sentences and then you tell them to ask questions in a role play, and they do the famous one in Spanish, and I don't know if some of your languages, all the Romance ones do, but you can take a sentence and then invert it with a no. They cheat, you know? You're like, well, no, that's not actually, you know, I'm not looking for that type of an interrogative. So they're not, so information gap's great. Jigsaw puzzles, jigsaw is same idea where they both have different pieces of the information. They have to work together to actually fill out something. Role plays can be really beneficial. I'll give you some ideas. And the idea is through negotiation of meaning, you get to this output, which is very, very vital. All right, task-based language teaching. So that's the first pages that you have here. There's no way I'd have time to go through all of this, so this would be a workshop in and of itself. Hopefully this is here for you to look at later. The goal for task-based language teaching is that tasks are meaningful. So think about the activities that sometimes you see in textbooks. I know I'm being really hard on textbooks, but textbooks are usually 10 years behind contemporary theory, and they're usually written by people that aren't linguists, which grates on me. So I see a lot of problems with a lot of the activities that I've seen. I'm really excited to see these new textbooks that are coming out because it's exciting to see some innovative practices, hopefully. Think about the things that you're asking your students to do. Does this matter in the real world? Are you helping them get to functional use of the language? Are they going to be more equipped to know how to say what to whom, right? Know how to say what to whom and where, what. That whole expression always, I guess because I'm third trimester pregnant, I can't remember it. Make sure your tasks have a clear outcome. They know the objective. What is the goal and what are you expected to be able to do? All right, and so this is something that all of my 40410 students have to do. They have to incorporate this in their e-portfolio. They have to do a TBLT task. They have to choose. These are some suggestions that the Willises give. And then the next few pages are a guided activity. So if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to play around with it, it'll take you through those steps, okay, to come up with a task base. And then the subsequent pages are some great, if you wanted to get a better feel for how you could use surveys, for example, as a task, this is a really great piece written by Joshua Cohen. Just a couple pages. It'll give you a better feel. There's a lot of great suggested readings here. Good summer reads, maybe. And then I gave you some of my notes here about how you could use authentic language, an actual article in your respective language, and do some great stuff like just give them the first line and have them work in groups to predict how the story goes, right? Just give them the title. Some of you may be already doing this. This is a very simple, useful, effective task-based type of activity. All right, polling, questionnaires. Questionnaires are really fun. I usually do Teen Magazine where they have, you can rate yourself, right? You have to go through and read synopses and rate whether or not you're healthy. Those are really fun tasks where students, they're into them because they're seeing them anyways in their teen magazines in the first language, so why not give it to them in the second language? They're simplistic enough that they can do them. All right, technology, we finally arrived, and I know that I have about 15 more minutes, maybe? Amber and I always talk about the fact that we have high hopes to always finish on time, and we always plan too much. I guess that's a common curse as a teacher, right? I think you all can relate with me there. So technology, again, not a method. No, if you ever hear anyone say that this is a great method, say, no, that's not, no, technology is not a method. It's a vehicle by which you can exploit positively, augment, scaffold learners towards learning outcomes already that are established by you, okay? Some of the benefits that I see that really excite me about technology, first and foremost, choice. I love that I can have an activity that I've done that's been very static on paper. I can adapt that activity by using the new technology, and then I can say, you explore. You figure out which one you like, you pick it. I'm not bored when I grade anymore, honestly. I don't get the same thing. I have a very clear rubric for my students. They know what their expectations are. It's not loosey-goosey. It's very clear about the type of assignment, a homework project that they're turning in. But all of a sudden, they're the ones that are experimenting out there with authentic language use. Amber's a bad example because she was my student in 303 and she's a highly motivated, conscientious learner. But she got so sucked into some of the blogs that she was reading, she created Pinterest boards, she went way above and beyond. That should be the goal, right? Is that you provide the space, the idea. Your students get lost out there, not lost in a good way. They get excited about what they're seeing out there, and then they choose it for their own. It's no longer you telling them to do that. They really want to read recipes in Spanish and make some really cool, authentic pastelitos or whatever there will be. Autonomy is really, really huge. Giving students, and that goes along with choice. Being empowered to choose their own path in the learning adventure. Creativity, there's so much creativity built into the way these technologies are used. Authentic language and culture exposure, this is quite obvious. There are some people that would criticize this, that the web isn't necessarily, the web is its own culture, so you have to be careful with how we present that. But it definitely is a lot more proximate to the native culture than a textbook, right? So, or a classroom. And then digital fluency, which Amber already highlighted on, which is really, really valid. And if I may, your students, a large population of them, are going to come to Boise State. Guess what? They're going to be expected in Spanish, and it's adapting over to our German and French programs. They're going to be expected to use these technologies. So you can use that as a way to say, hey guys, I'm prepping you for college. I'm getting you ready for BSU. These are tools that if you can get them now, you're going to have a huge step ahead when you get to BSU or any university, okay? And then my favorite is the fact that I think that these technologies, if utilized well, provide students opportunity to have more interaction in the target language, all at the same time. That blows my mind. Before in a communicative language classroom, you'd have to do kind of what we just did, groups. Okay, what did you say? What did you say? What did you say? Right? You lose a lot of class time. Now, I pose a question, everybody has to respond all at the same time, and I can see their responses. It's incredible the efficiency of time that I have, and it also gives a certain anonymity to students too. Okay, that can provide responses in the target language without feeling like they have to raise their hand, which again, does help certain personality types. So let's look at some examples. Google Image, most simplistic, okay? I like to use this with vocabulary. Super easy. Everyone's used Google Image. I don't know a kid who doesn't know. My 2-year-old's used Google Image before. tell them to get out their phones, okay, when you're going over vocabulary that's new, especially I like this with cultural terms that they might not understand. Like folklorico, baile folklorico. What is that? Folklore? I mean, that's not a term we use a lot in English to begin with, right? So then they put that in Google Images and voila, all of a sudden they can look at a picture. Then you tell them in groups, okay, every one of you pick a picture and I want you to describe it in the target language. What colors do you see? What's happening? You have more opportunity for language practice that is associated with that vocabulary, which is the goal of vocabulary learning. Okay, one of my favorite things, and this is for, how many of you teach at the advanced level, maybe AP? Okay, a few of you. So one of the things that we do a lot with advanced language is we talk about metaphors, okay? Or can you give me a metaphor to describe this concept? I love doing this with Google Image. I ask my students to come up with a visual metaphor to represent bilingualism. One of my students, Matthew Kelly, he showed the class a piece of rye bread. I thought that was really creative because it's a slice of bread, right? But it's all mixed together. And being bilingual, I can't be a native English speaker without being also a second language Spanish speaker. I'm one and the same, right? So he was able to say that all in the target language, show his really cool picture. I'll always have that picture associated in my brain, as will his group members. So that's a really easy way to use Google Image and Flickr, and it can really be a nice stimulation for discussion. Okay, so YouTube, go to page 12, if you will. 12 is, this is a lesson plan. This is an example. I'm sure you have great examples too. This is an example of how you could do a communicative lesson, okay? Usually you would always typically start off with a comprehension input. I like to start off with warm-ups. I'm all about warm-ups. My brain needs 5 minutes to kind of enter in. But after a warm-up, you would do a comprehension input activity. And then the second one is what I want to show you is how a creative way to use YouTube. So if you go to the page, I think it's 18. Sorry that now that I do everything digitally, I really have a love-hate relationship with photocopiers, and I really do not like those at the moment. It cut off all my numbering.
Amen.
Yeah. So this is an example activity for you. I don't have the time to be able to show you how I would do it. Maybe in a different workshop at a different time, but this is a really fun activity. Commercials are fantastic. They exist in all of your languages. All I did was I went and looked for commercials that associated with the vocabulary. And I found them in, how many are there? There's 7 different countries, all associating with a different symptom. So after I did the comprehension input, I gave my students the opportunity to be exposed to the words first. Then I took them to YouTube and had, and Amber can maybe talk about this later, but I was able to create my own class in YouTube, okay, my own folder. Just click on there for my activity, everything's there, they don't see. I put the commercial on in a different order, and they have to read the symptoms and pair them. What's great about that? They're getting exposed to a variety of different, they're getting exposed to a lot of different varieties of Spanish. It's native speech. They're having to fixate on vocabulary, and they're getting some really great visual stimuli with that. So that was a fun activity. That's something that you can do with YouTube. That's one example. Google Maps is on page 2021. I love Google Earth, actually. On the tablet, it's fantastic. So right now, I'm doing a new project with Amber, and my senior seminar, we created an iBook. And for every chapter, my senior seminar is on sociolinguistics, so we go to Spain, Latin America, we go back to Spain, look at bilingualism, go back to Latin America, look at bilingualism, then to the United States. We're always looking at maps. So I always put a link in there to Google Earth, and all of a sudden, everyone's twisting and turning the Earth as they will, and they can fixate on different little cities. It's so cool. It pairs with your hand. It's one of the best tools that it actually is. It's almost as if you have a moldable globe in front of you, and it's so easy. So that's something that can be really fun. I call it my ruby red slippers.
And we'll have time next time to play with it too. So we'll get a chance to play with that.
Good.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really great is creating a Google map. So if you get to the part in your chapter where instructions, commands, right? So oftentimes those two are paired together. Instruction, vocabulary, directions. Woo, Those of you that are Spanish speakers know that I just did a false cognate backwards. That was kind of crazy. Directions in Spanish are often paired with mandates or commands. And so you can do something really fun with maps. I always do this. Students love it. They go into Google Maps. They can choose their country. And they need to find 5 to 6, for example, really cool places. And they get to explore with the little person. You can go. I actually tell them to go to my favorite bar, which is a cafe in Spain. I have to very carefully go to my favorite cafe, Unamuno in Salamanca, and I'll tell them where to go, and they'll actually look at the street, and they have to describe how it's different from the U.S. Oh, they have this great language that they're getting to do, and they're getting to see how the culture really is, right? How life is lived in Spain, and they're making their own personalized map in groups. And then what I love about the new and updated version of Google Maps, you can do this really cool thing where, it's in that third picture where it says annotate, you can tell them that they have to write instructions or directions on how to get from point A to B. So all of a sudden, now they're using grammar. So you have vocabulary, culture, grammar, all in one activity. This is not a one-class thing. This is usually 2 to 3 classes. It takes time, but it's fabulous. And it's a real way to use a language in a functional manner. What's been really fun about this, some of my students that are going to go study abroad anticipate the city that they're going to go study in, and they create a map for the city, and then they have their map all ready to go, and they'll actually go and, right, and they'll visit places that they wanted to, that they found virtually, which I think is just so great, all their ideas. Okay, so Nearpod, you're going to take them to Nearpod?
Yeah, next Saturday.
Next Saturday?
Yes.
Okay.
But you can tell them a little bit about it.
Really
yes, yeah, absolutely.
An example? Oh, Amber, how do I get out of this?
Just press that home.
Okay.
And then do you want to connect to, here, let me.
Oh, yeah, you know what? I'll do it on here. And then I need to log in. So, on a day where, on a real good day, wait, okay.
Oh, it's me.
Okay, I need to log out of you. Oh, for Pete's sakes.
Kelly, do this. Go in the top left-hand corner, go to File. Go to New Incognito window.
Thank you.
And then just go to nearpod.com.
Much easier. Okay, log in. Just bear with me for a second so I can show you exactly. How many of you have seen Nearpod or played around with it? A little bit? Okay, cool. Students that come into your classrooms to observe or mentor teach, or if you're a mentor teacher, they'll know how to use it, so use that. Okay. Because we use it a lot in Foiling for 10. So if you get them in your classrooms, tell them, hey, I want you to use Nearpod. I hear that Professor Arispe made you use it a lot. So, all right. I'm going to show you, you're welcome to join if you have your tablet really quickly. This is an example that I used for my art section, okay? So I'll go to live session right now. And do you see the pin at the top? Amber's going to do this with you. You'll go a lot more in depth about how to actually create them. So AVETH. So if you have the Nearpod app, you can go there and follow along.
Or nearpod.com, top right-hand corner, you can type that in if you have your laptop with you.
Yeah, thank you. So basically what's amazing about Nearpod is that I put all of my automatic in your presentation. I did this with my linguistics class actually when we got to the section on phonetics and phonology, which is so difficult for learners. They're in their second language learning about linguistics and phonetics, which is like a third language. I had them I had a PowerPoint presentation up, and then I was managing a Nearpod presentation that they were following along with. So they had to do interactive activities that were mirroring my PowerPoint. It was so effective, it was so helpful. It was the first time that I felt like they got it after one class because those comprehension checks, that interactivity was there. So you would see something like this on your mobile device. I would be talking to you about art. Basically, it would give you the opportunity to enroll, so really quickly, just put your name or an initial just so we can go quick. What's really great about this, Amber will show you, this is my biggest, and again, we have airplane in our classroom, so I don't stand up here anymore. I'm always fine, making sure, right? But what's really great is that I had a couple students one semester that thought that they were too cool for school and wanted to go onto Facebook. And what happens the second one of those students read, I click on that and I know exactly which student. And so then I do the really, really awkward, uncomfortable thing, and I would just hop over Brittany. And I would just stand here for like 5 minutes and lecture. She would feel very uncomfortable and never do it again. Okay, so it's thanks Allie for going off. Yeah, so that's what I would do. It's fantastic. I would say, so you guys should be, this is not what you see. You should see a picture, right? Do you see a picture? Okay, so what was really cool is that I created this Nearpod presentation in tandem with the first day of the vocabulary. They wrote word associations up on the board, and I took a picture of it, and I threw it into this presentation. And now they have to actually, you guys should have to write on top of that a word that you think associates with those words, could add to that. So expanding vocabulary, hopefully in meaningful ways. I could then fixate on any drawing. So this is just some ideas. I have to move so fast because Amber is going to be able to talk to you a lot more about this. I have discussion questions in there. I didn't have to create these out of nowhere, by the way. Where were they? In my textbook. Some of these questions were actually valid, really good discussion questions. I just turned them into being interactive. So rather than asking this question in the know-it-alls, raising their hands and always participating, now all of you are responsible for participating. All of you have the chance to do that. So that's how you can use your textbook in tandem with these new technologies. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then I have questions here, polls, vocabulary, quizzes, intermixed. That's all review from the day prior, giving them added practice. I know, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just because I have to show, I want to get to the last one here. I wanted to show you, I'm making you all dizzy. All right.
But I promise we'll have plenty of time to play, and you're going to actually get to make one next time. So.
I know. And I would never have this up here. So you guys would never see this. Okay, so this would all be on my tablet, and then I can control it from there. So you're not looking here anymore. Where are you looking? On your tablet. Okay, so, and really the classroom, you can do so much with the space. I really don't need to be staged on the stage. That is not communicative, right? That's not in line with CLT. Learner centered. One thing that was really cool was that I was able to find the MP3 of Pablo Neruda reciting one of his poems. And so my students were able to, they finished this at home, and they were able to actually listen to Neruda reciting his poem rather than reading it in the textbook. In the textbook, it was just for them to read. Here, they could actually listen and align it with the textbook and read it. And it was just so much richer. So here it is. Yeah. So that's an idea of how you could use. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna check out a Nearpod. Amber will show you how you can see everything that every single learner does in Nearpod. So they can do this as homework if you don't finish your presentations, which I'm always guilty of. I'll say, okay, we stopped here. You guys need to finish the rest in addition to your homework tonight. And then I can see every activity report for them. I know exactly what they're doing. This is just so in line with the principles of communicative language teaching, learner-centered, getting everybody to participate and giving them a voice. Shaylin, did you have a question?
No, I think no, I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to go back to, where's the presentation?
So my doc is minimized, so go all the way down to the bottom. And then click on Keynote, which is on the left-hand side to the right of Chrome.
There we go. Awesome. Okay. I'm not going to have time to go over Google Hangouts on air. I think, are you going to cover that? Probably not.
A little bit.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about, go ahead and talk about that quickly.
I aligned it with proficiency standards, and then I'll finish there. Okay, so.
I have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So if we're using the presentation, I think I heard you say that you keep the presentation open for the kids to do at home. So I'm not sure if it's a Nearpod question or a keynote question or whatever, but how long does that session stay open? And if I'm teaching the same class, first hour and second hour, when I reopen a new section, does that close my previous?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so there are two questions there. So the first is, the first was, how long will it stay open? So once it's homework, it stays open until you want. You can then go in and close it, right?
And you can see when students submitted it as well. It'll have their name and a date and timestamp.
Yeah, it's really great. There was one class actually where my son got sick, I got sick, and my husband it was horrible, and I had to cancel class, and I just turned my Nearpod presentation I was going to do in class to homework. It was fabulous. And so they were able to do it from home, and I didn't feel like they were losing out on being exposed to the target language. Sometimes I feel like that if I'd had them doing these erroneous activities that are just written or whatnot, they're still communicating, right? So that was great. Your second question about sections.
Absolutely. You can have as many sections with one presentation that you want. You can use it with 3 sections of a class. You can use it over and over for each semester. I'm going to teach you guys how to do reports where you can actually download the data, and you can download it for each section. So you can have more than one going at a time.
And share. Share Nearpod presentations. Those of you that have, I mean, some of you are teaching languages where you're it, and I sympathize with you. But if you're not it, share. Say, can you take over this chapter? I'll take over this chapter, and then we'll share in Nearpod. There's no reason for you not to collaborate here. All right. Finally, we arrive at probably the most complex technology tool, but I'm going to provide you with the cliff notes on how to use it. I want to talk to you about actually how to align this with proficiency standards. That's the goal here. So if you could go to page, I think it's 22, 23, 24. This is an activity that I use in my advanced conversation course, which, by the way, has a really faulty title because it says advanced. What do you think these students on average, their OPI, because all of them did an OPI in the first 4 weeks when they entered in. What do you think? Do you think they're all advanced? And they're all proficiency interviews. So you would have to know the scales. The majority of them enter in at intermediate, mids to lows. So they're an entire level the break between intermediate high and advanced low is the hardest break. So it's the hardest bridge to jump. So they're actually, they enter in with kind of false perceptions about where they're at with their proficiency. They think they're advanced because the title is advanced, and I've taken my 200 level coursework, therefore I'm advanced. And this course, and unfortunately, for better or for worse, it can be a good thing, but we have a lot of native speakers sometimes, and so they're very advanced, and as far as speech goes, they have other issues, it's very complex. So, with the help of Amber again, we're dangerous together, you guys. I put together these, I took our textbook, which was Vista's conversation, and for every chapter I thought about, okay, what is a simulated OPI for this section? So it's a warm-up, a level check, a challenge, or a ceiling, and then a close, which is kind of the simulation of the OPI. And created, and this was with help from my research assistant at the time, undergraduate, he was great. We sat down together and we did these kind of as if they were chat role play. You can see the first one, and again I apologize, it's just in Spanish, it's on page 24. I like soccer a lot, so I put them, one was Barcelona, one was Real Madrid. Cristiano Ronaldo was not mentioned at all ever in my class. Fatima and I are on wars here. And so that's just how I named them for their teams. But you can see there's a warm-up question and then there's a cool down, and there were 2 simulations. So they would have a level check. So a level check is something they should be able to do at intermediate. So, describe. That's something at intermediate they should be able to do. Their challenge or their ceiling question was what? Narrate in the past. What happens with students that are not advanced, that think they're advanced? They start off the first sentence or 2 in the past, and then what do? Infinitives. It's like they go back to 101. It is so classic. I listened to so many recorded OPI sessions where this is classic. And we would say, if you're analyzing this in OPI, you'd say linguistic breakdown, lower level, immediately. Can't sustain the past. And so we're not even looking at accuracy, we're just looking at communicative function. Can they stay in the past? They can't. And so these simulations always challenge them with that. Okay, so they would have to do this. I'm very explicit about my goals, by the way. So I don't just give this to them and expect them to, I tell them, you're gonna suffer in that second question and that fourth question. It's gonna be hard. It's not gonna feel good. I want you, when you review this, I want you to see if you stay in the past. And I want you to reflect on that. So if you go to the second page, or the next page, which is 25, I think, 25 and 26 actually, okay? This was their rubric. This was how they were assessed. They were assessed, and we used tools that were really, really awesome, and if I had more time, I'd show them to you. But you all know Google Hangouts. There's a tool called Google Hangout on Air, where they're able to actually video record. So immediately, they push a button that says on air. As soon as they're done, they have a YouTube video of themselves chatting. It's incredible. They would then take that link, plop it into a tool called Video Notes, which is hosted with Google Drive. And they have, on one hand, their video, and then another space for them to annotate. What are they annotating? Reflections that align to standards, to markers that they should be meeting for advanced language proficiency. So this is how you can use technology in a way that's very explicit, very visual for them. Are you meeting the mark? What's really great about this, and I'm still analyzing, it's kind of a whopper of a study, but these were the reflection questions on the back, and they're actually in English. I gave them the choice. They could reflect in English or Spanish. I cared about the reflection, the quality of the reflection. A lot of them chose to reflect in Spanish, which was great. Do I fully answer the questions with complete sentences, right? When asked to narrate in the past, do I consistently stay in the past? Because these are all things that I had seen time and time again, where you'd have a student start off, and you're going, yeah, advanced, maybe advanced low. Oh, intermediate, high, advanced low. They're in there. And then they get to the question in the past, and it's like, right? Because I'm there. I want to root for, you're rooting for your students. You want to see them get to those higher levels, and they can't sustain. So 8 of these chat sessions with them having to actually reflect and be aware about their inconsistencies. I think it matters. I think it really helps with that So this is an example. I can't really what advanced means from the canvas because it's not just my work, it's people who know a lot of stuff. Okay, so that's an example for you. And let's see here. I think, yeah, I'm going to go to Q&A. There's a lot more in here for you. You can just take the time to go through it. I know that that was a lot of information. I certainly hope it helped. I think if there's something that you can take away from this, communicative language teaching does give you the autonomy to choose, but be thinking about things like, are you providing opportunities for students to negotiate meaning? Okay, that's really important. Yeah.
So we're sitting here discussing.
Sure.